Today I'd like to talk to you about American unity. I'm sure you've heard people talk about the idea of American unity or bipartisanship, but that talk often rings hollow because the person saying it is a politician who speaks in broad patriotic terms but then ends up partaking in the very actions they claim to be against. So today I would like to go into more depth on this issue and talk about ways in which we can actually help to solve the problem. Before I go on, I'd like to define unity so that it's clear what it is I mean when I say that. Being unified doesn't mean we should all be marching to the same beat. Our ability to disagree and debate is what makes us free and strong. But beneath those disagreements should be respect and a sense of commonality. If our country is united, that simply means we are all committed to bettering our country, and we recognize and appreciate the value of our fellow citizens, despite any philosophical or ideological differences we may have. This idea of unity is present in our founding documents and our everyday lives. The Latin phrase e pluribus unum, which means out of many, one, is written on our coins. The Constitution begins with the phrase, "We the people of the United States in order to form a more perfect union." And the Declaration of Independence ends with the words, "We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." This sense of unity has pushed us forward and kept our democracy strong over the last 200 years. But as much as our founding fathers liked to talk about cooperation and respect, American politics have rarely been civil. Thomas Jefferson, the man who wrote those words I just quoted, while running for president in 1800, he hired a reporter who wrote that his opponent, John Adams, had both male and female sex organs. You can't make this stuff up. So American politics hasn't always lived up to the unity mentioned in our founding documents. But we are becoming more polarized. The divisiveness that was previously reserved for politicians has begun to spread to the American public. As you can see, negative views of the opposing party have increased significantly over the last 20 years. In addition, the American people are becoming more polarized ideologically. As you can see, in 1994, most Democrats and most Republicans held moderate views. But in the last 20 years, those views have become significantly more extreme. Worst of all, polarization is beginning to affect how we see our fellow citizens. This graph shows that a significant number of Republicans and Democrats believe it would be easier or harder to get along with a neighbor depending on their political party. And this trend gets worse when we look at those who are highly engaged politically. These trends hurt our country and make our government less effective. They also hurt relationships. So what is causing this shift? Well, one thing is that political messages have changed. It's hard to say when exactly things started to change or who was the first to start, but it doesn't matter anyways. It wasn't one person or one side, it was many. And the basic change was this. Politicians began to recognize the power of fear and morality. They began to change the way they talked. Instead of saying the other side's ideas and policies are bad, they began to say the other side's values and morals are bad for this country. They realized that if they could make you hate the other side, or convince you that they have bad intentions, then there's no way you would sit out an election. So campaigns have become more and more focused on how bad the other side is. Another large cause of polarization is changes in the media. With the growth of social media and cable news, we now have many options in order to choose where we get our news from. And media outlets no longer need to appeal to a broad audience in order to be successful. We are now getting our news from different sources who frame issues in different ways, and usually we gravitate towards outlets that confirm what we already believe. So instead of everyone getting their news from similar sources with little bias, we are getting our news from different sources, and often those sources have significant bias. And that makes it harder to get along. In addition, because news media has become more fragmented, it has also become more sensationalized as outlets compete for viewers. I'm sure you have noticed that only the most outrageous stories seem to make the news. If a politician wants to get press coverage, they'll be a lot more successful making divisive and polarizing claims. Another issue is the fast-paced culture we live in. We often want our information to be simple and fast, so news articles and updates become tweets and headlines. Complex issues can be misconstrued when they are boiled down. Important factors can be cut out, and when we don't know the whole story, opposing viewpoints often seem more radical and harmful than they actually are. So that's just a small overview of why polarization is happening. Now, how can we go about fixing it? First instinct might be to get angry and blame the politicians and media executives, and that's understandable. They should change. But we should also recognize that their actions are to a large extent reflective of what we value. If those actions were not effective, they wouldn't do that. This isn't an issue that can be fixed with one single policy, or by the president, or by a different president. It's a change that has to happen at an individual level, in the minds of every American. A change in the way we think, the way we see the world, what we prioritize, what matters to us. In the past, it was easier to attain the unity that is at the heart of this country. But our society has become more complex, and it is easier to divide us now than it ever has been. Now more than ever, our thoughts and our attentions are being pulled in 1,000 different directions. And it can be easy to go about life angry about everything and discouraged by every shocking headline or soundbite. I know I've felt that way many times. I've let negativity and divisiveness get to me, and I don't like feeling that way. And I've seen the damage that can be done from that kind of thinking. So I'd like to leave you with some ideas about what we can do to help change things. The first thing is vote. Everyone should vote, but don't just vote. Think about unity and bipartisanship when you do vote. If a candidate doesn't commit to work across the aisle, or if they haven't in the past, think twice before you give them your vote. It is especially important to vote in primaries, where turnout is lower, and only the most polarized citizens vote. Primaries are also important because I don't expect anyone to vote against a member of their own party just because they don't talk about unity as much as the other candidate. In primaries, you can vote for a candidate of your own party who is committed to maintaining unity. Another thing we can do is recognize. When we listen to someone we agree with, though we may trust what they have to say and agree with their ideas, it is important to recognize that they have incentives to mislead. When we listen to politicians, it is important to remember that we are getting a biased viewpoint. Another thing we can do is be slower to judgment. As I mentioned earlier, news has become more trivial. And with the growth of social media, issues are often boiled down to 140 characters. But domestic and foreign policies can be very complex. And when we make up our minds about an issue after a tweet or a 2-minute video, we often fail to see the other side and the reasonable arguments that may support that side. Another important thing is to not click or watch, as in don't click on articles that make outrageous claims or that are clearly written in an attempt to polarize you. And don't watch news stories that are extremely sensationalized. This one seems pretty obvious, but it's important. If we stop reading and watching that material, then people will stop producing it. These are just a few ideas. The important thing is that we think about unity in our daily lives. We need to see ourselves as Americans first and members of a political party second. We need to see the value in each other and strive to work together. We all say we love our country, but we cannot truly love our country if we don't love our fellow countrymen and women. Thank you.